more recent. The decisions from the MPC, was that what you were expecting, or were you expecting something different?
No, I had expected that the conditions were such that a hold decision was more appropriate.
At this time?
Yes, at this time. If you recall, the MPC has held this rate, the same since July 2016, and for justifiable reasons. And it's because of the hold decisions that we've had this, we had disinflation for quite some time, up till I think August, before we now saw a resurgence. You know that each time MPC meets, the decisions, the choices are usually three: is either to reduce, to loosen, or to further tighten, or or to hold. And everybody prefers loosening, including the central bank. But loosening at this time would be, pretty difficult.
This time we had all 11 members.
All 11 members in agreement that we should hold. As I said earlier, if you loosen at this time, you further, if you like, incentivize the capital flow reversals we've been having because of the interest rate hike in the US. It will also when you also loosen, you discover that it's particularly in the case of
I'm trying to look for the word.
Yes, the right word to say. So it's either you loosen, or you hold, or you further tighten. Now, it would be difficult to also say you're tightening, again, because of the conditions in the banking industry, at this time. The banks are already characterized with high non-performing loans, and if you further tighten, the tendency for banks will be to reprice, their assets, and you further worsen that position. Right. Again, you also increase the cost of borrowing in an economy that is still trying to recover. Growth rate is
let
still
let me bring Ogbonna
so the best
thing
to do is to hold. Yes.
Now he's spoken about. He's moved into the aspect of investment and all of those. Do you think that in the last this is 14th time now? Do you think that within this period the monetary policy could have at least tweaked the monetary policy decisions?
No, for me, I still think that holding is the best thing for us now.
All straight 14.
All straight 14. But all I expected was a situation where our development finance institutions are given, given some leverage to lend more. I always say, if you depend more on commercial banks to do the lending to SMEs, their philosophy around their own lending is quite different from development finance institutions. Now, if you give a boost to, let's say, Bank of Agriculture, BOI, to lend more, don't fuse the two lending philosophies. For example, you don't tell BOI to lend money, and then you have to get you have to get like a collateral from a commercial bank, because they will treat the same as you're lending, you're coming to borrow money from a commercial bank. So it's the same process that they're going to use to evaluate the credit. So I still think that central bank, I always try to describe the monetary policy and fiscal policy with football. I say everybody you see from the middle, that's defensive midfield, to the goalkeeper are all monetary policy guys. And then the strikers, the guys that play up front are the fiscal policy guys. Now, at every point in time where, if you notice, if the ball supply comes from the back to the front line, and then the success of a team, yes, is highly dependent on what the people at the fiscal policy end do. That's what gives you the victory of every match. Now, if, for example, you don't throw more funds into, or you don't throw your balls, out there for them front line for them to juggle and try to score, you will not get as much success. So I still think they should do a lot more when it comes to the, supporting the development finance institutions so that they can fuse up that gap that exists, in lending to the manufacturing sector and then the SMEs.
Talking about development finance institution, we have the BOI, we have the BOA, we have the DBN, Development Bank of Nigeria. We know funds have been given to this development finance institutions in the past. Would you say we have seen these funds being utilized properly, or the access to these funds? Let me put it that way.
Now, this is the tricky thing about it. Over the years, I think our policymakers have erroneously equated what I call, or what I call your ability to access funds to your ability to access capital. I could just break it down a bit. If you don't have what it takes to do your bootstrapping, you can't even come to a bank to ask for a loan. They have checklists. There are things you must do. You must have 30% equity. You must have your business plan done. You must have EIA, depending on the case. You must have acquired the land where you're going to be putting up this factory or whatever it is. You must have your raw material supply strategy all in place. If you don't have all these things, you can't even come to BOI to start asking for loan. So this is where the issue stands. And when I listen to some policymakers or some users who say, the monies are there, you can't access it. There are just few people that can access these funds. I give a very simple example. There was a time, I think it was 2014, that the deputy governor Sarah Ladi I was privileged to be somewhere. She made a presentation and she said, over 200 and something billion naira have been given out to 208 companies. And I said, okay, share that amongst the companies. They're talking about 200 companies having access to these funds. Why? Because they are the ones that have capacity. They are the ones that will have collateral enough to take up these funds. So we need to also look at, which brings me to, we need to look at how to accommodate those who are in the smaller SMEs, those who don't have access to collateral, those who will not be able to, build their projects to a level where they can come to the development finance system. Not to hold brief for them, but I still think we need to be a bit more innovative in trying to solve that problem.
And I think that's why the government is now talking about having specialized banks to reach these people. I'm sure you heard about government's plans to establish entrepreneur banks and people money bank. Okay, these banks are meant to now reach these people without necessarily asking for a collateral. Yeah,
because I was going to come to the aspect of the fact that the CBN governor actually even mentioned the fact that the SMEs actually need more funding. It's not in form of a directive, but he kind of directed that the financial institutions must focus on these SMEs, and you said that they do not have that capacity. How soon do you think, because these institutions you mentioned, before they come up, how we have to go through all these processes, and before this come up, we have trader money that has given out some little 10,000, and then you say we repay back, you get more money. What do you think we need to do? Because I know the banks won't throw money at these small SMEs without having to know how to get their money back.
Yes. Yes, I agree with you. And
short-term measures now, like we can, or short to medium-term measures before we have these sort of banks. Like
the central bank has been using moral suasion, more or less over time. If you read the MPC reports, over time it's been moral suasion. The banks have been encouraged to lend, money to the real sectors, and the central bank each time will lament that. The monetary aggregates are underperforming because credit to the real sector, has been very, 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 very low. If you look at the last MPC communique number 121, it talked about credit to the private sector, growing at 2.3% on an annualized basis, whereas the benchmark target was around 12%, and that was why in July. The central bank came up with this initiative of having, the real sector support facility, the differentiated cash reserve ratio, for banks to compensate them. Any bank that has provided proof of giving credit to the real sector at 9% for, a 7-year period, facility would get a refund from its differentiated, from its cash reserve ratio of 22.5. So these initiatives are there. Another one is the bond, the corporate bond scheme that the central bank says these companies too can issue corporate bonds for 7 years, and central banks will also be part of the off-takers to take up these bonds from them. It's still early to begin to evaluate the impact of these policies and initiatives. But of course, by and large, all these policies that still pass through the deposit money banks, the risk still remains, with those banks. If the central bank is giving money to commercial banks for on lending to the risk sector, the risk is still borne by the commercial banks, even though they're saying give it at 9%. And that is why the banks too, have to be very careful in giving out those loans. And just as I said, it's not just anybody that comes that you give the loan. The person must meet the credit criteria.
Because we've seen situations where Nigerians collected money, and that's when they married more wives.
I mean,
that is why it doesn't have to be everybody. You have to meet the credit, particularly now that we are entering the political season. Yes, banks have to be very careful, and the central bank governor said this much the last time. In giving loans to politically expose the person, so that they don't use those loans and do campaigns.
But if you ask me, I just wanted to say something. See, if you see models that have worked, I think the best thing is to embrace the model. I like the fact that yes, an organization like Nassarawa came out to also support, which is a very fantastic initiative, and then the Anchor Borrowers Program. Now, if this, you see, the program has actually worked. Now, that means the program actually, took into consideration our culture as a people. Now, we can do that in other sectors, replicating that on cassava,
the government actually also said
palm oil and all of that. So these are things that we must do, and we must do them quickly. But like I always say, everything we do is within a circumference, as in every component or every sector must come together for an economy to grow. Yes. Now, in the center of this whole circumference is where policy stays, funding, and then that is also where you find what would drive this entire, which is what I call infrastructure to drive economic growth. Now, if you notice, the present government have actually focused a lot on trying to get some of this infrastructure to work. Because if you don't get them to work, how will somebody from his farm gate get goods out, to the market? If you don't get your road infrastructure to work, or your railways, you can't even get solid mineral to work, because these are heavy metals that you can't move from where they are to the seaport for export to increase our, our foreign earnings as a country. So I think that the measures, yes, they are working, but they're a bit slow because everybody is now saying, okay, I can't even see these things. But I mean, if we give it a bit of time, I think that, in a very short while, we'll begin to feel the
Prof,
effects.
let me come to you now. The governor did respond to the question on the U.S. Fed normalization policy and the Brexit and its implications on the Nigerian economy. And he said a whole lot of issues around how there's really no cause for alarm for Nigeria, even though our external reserves have slightly reduced. And this way, it's not like we're having zero inflows. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, the normalization in the U.S., of course, is the major reason we're having this capital flow reversal. It's not just in Nigeria. Other emerging economies, have been affected. Turkey in particular, Argentina, these countries have been hit, even South Africa. As a matter of fact, as you know, the Reserve Bank of South Africa, the MPC, yes, also increased their repo rates from 6.25 to 6.75 on account of the fact that the rand has lost about 70% of its value, since this year. So the depreciation of the rand is what is leading them to increase, to hike the rates. So normalization is affecting, is like an air wind that is blowing, no goods, emerging economies. And that's also what is triggering these outflows we are witnessing in our own equities market in particular. You've seen equities market on the decline for quite some time. The major reason is this increasing yields in the US. Yes, our domestic issues, the political tension is there, but that one happens to be the primary driver of outflows. Foreign investors are selling off, taking profit, and that's also hitting reserves. You notice reserves are also under pressure. Now, if the CBN is saying there isn't any cause for alarm, it's because of the quantum of reserves that we have. At circa $41 billion, the CBN that can finance over 10 months of merchandise imports, the CBN is still in a position to do interventions and ensure that the stability of the Naira is maintained. As I told you, part of why South Africa increased was because of falling rand. Part of why Turkey also hiked rate because of the lira. Russia too is also the same thing. But in our own case, we have enjoyed this stability we saw this convergence in both the BDC and the investors and exporters window, okay, stability in foreign exchange market for quite some time now.
We'll come to the issue of...
and that's why I also think that there isn't any cause, for worry.
All right, we'll come to the issue of the reserves versus Naira stability, but let's just stay in the foreign scene. Let's look at the issue of oil. $60 per barrel this morning, 58. Now, prices are coming down, 10% of these, but yet that is what sustains, the Nigerian economy. For you, what are the worries?
For me, the worries are so glaring. I mean, we can't continue to depend on oil, and even the oil, we're not adding value to the oil. So, because I mean, if you export crude oil and then import finished petroleum products, I mean, you're still shooting yourself in the foot. So, but I still think that if we diversify the economy, just we're working towards diversifying the economy, a lot of this volatility will not, won't feel it, because I mean, if anything happens to oil price, everybody starts shaking. Anything that happens to our production capacity as a nation, we begin to...
The oil prices definitely are beginning to affect our reserves. Our reserves.
Yes, let me quickly add here that the real worry really is on the fiscal end. Okay, the budget, was based on $51 per barrel, the 2018 budget. Even though the oil price at $58 or $59 is still, ahead. But the challenge we've always had is in the production. Part of why GDP fell in second quarter of 2018, GDP fell from 1.95 to 1.5 was because of a drop in oil production. And if you saw the central bank economic report, monthly economic report for August, that's the latest, it was very clear that we are witnessing shortfall in revenue, largely on account of a fall in production. Production is dropping because, according to the report, of repairs and maintenance of not necessarily as a result of vandalism, but because of repairs and maintenance. So, production is also key. Revenue is a function of price and output, so it's not just the price. Okay, Doctor, and with the price now falling, that is where the worry is.
Prof, we are running out of time.
The budget, the implementation of the budget is progressing very slowly because of shortfall in
quickly, Mr. Ogbonna, let me bring you. Let's talk about inflation. Now we are entering into the Yuletide season, and of course, campaign spending is the electionary season has also kicked in. What are your expectations? Are we going to see inflation continue to moderate as we go towards the end of the year?
No, I don't see that, because I don't see that happening. I mean, inflation will actually, go up a bit, because I mean, like you rightly said, there will be a lot of spending now, and then the spending that will, that'll come from the electionary season that we're in, and then because our culture, we work towards enjoying ourselves to the end of year. So
like
a lot of
Owambe
and all of that will happen. So then you can't regulate how people will spend their their income. But that will also, come down immediately after the season. Okay. So things will start to normalize, and then, we'll be entering into a new farming season and all of that. So a lot of investment will go into trying to, let's go back to farms and then,
So I think I also agree that the slight drop we saw in inflation rate from 11.28 to 11.26 is, seasonal. It's just, temporarily. And that's because we are approaching, festive season. Election-related, spending, is also to factor with, and then the pressure on reserves. So inflation is likely to spike further, but not beyond. I don't see that doing beyond 12%.
Staying with the narrative of inflation, you have the issue of new national minimum wage being put forward, and the fact that that giving workers that new wage, which is, they say it's at 30,000, will also likely increase inflation. But do we not have enough other aspects of the economy that increasing the wage, probably even in the capital market?
Yes, it's an area I've written extensively on. I've always argued that increasing the minimum wage to 30,000 will not, cause any distortion in prices or even employment. It's not going to have any significant effect, sustainable effect, on inflation. Even if you see a spike, it's going to be an immediate response, which will come down. And I have evidence. In 2011, when the minimum wage was increased from 7,500 to 18,000 naira. Inflation rate in 2010 was, you can check it, was 13.7%. But in 2011, when the minimum wage now, came into force, okay, inflation actually dropped to 10.8%, and we saw a decline in inflation. Inflation dropped even up to 2015. It was only in 2016 that we saw another spike in inflation to 15.7. Why? Because of the, if you recall, in 2016 we had removal of oil subsidy. We also had an increase in electricity tariffs. These two were mainly responsible for the increase in inflation rate we saw in 20, and not the increase in minimum wage. So the minimum wage will not, in my view, cause any distortion in or exert more inflationary pressure.
You have an increase.
Because the economy is, in my view, will absorb it.
That means you have an increase.
Aggregate demand is already weak, and the way you can stimulate aggregate demand is to raise, increase. Yes, I'm all for the increase in minimum wage.
Mr. Ogbonna, let's unemployment. Of course, we have a lot of youths in the streets without jobs. In Nigeria, generally without jobs. Do you think our leaders are rattled enough by the high unemployment rate in the country?
See, everybody's getting affected by the fact that there's high unemployment rate in Nigeria, because it's either it affects you directly or indirectly. Now, because an average person will tell you how many calls they receive per day for support from relatives and friends. Now, my concern really is, how do we take advantage of this unemployment to actually grow our economy? I've always said in past, everybody that use words, let's provide job for our teeming youth, does not understand productivity. You need the energy of the young people to infuse into your productive sector to get your country working. So my point is, if we industrialize, which is what I see happening in the nearest future, if we industrialize, we don't need to import labor. We already have labor. And then again, coming to the minimum wage thing, I also still think that we should expect more from whoever that is going to be receiving more. We should do a proper diagnosis on our human resource management system in this country, so that every person who receives a dime of taxpayers' money must have something to show for it, as in, I received this money and this is what I have contributed to the economy.
Any correlation within the new minimum wage affecting employment or creating more unemployment in the private sector?
You see,
in terms of paying wages for private sector?
It will definitely, because cost of production is already very high in Nigeria. So if you add, wages, it will definitely affect. So, but what it does make people in the private sector be innovative. So jobs that will go to 5 people, you have to try and see how you can reduce that to like 3 people doing that same job.
Yeah, but on the flip side, I also think the new minimum wage will boost company sales, company turnover, and ultimately companies' bottom line. And where that happens, of course, we see the positive ripple effect of that, on the stock market, on companies that are listed on the stock market. And on the minimum wage thing, don't forget too that we are talking about the organized private sector, and most of the companies there are already paying something higher than 18,000. That's why I also think that it's not going to be any.
Prof, before we round up, the issue of reserves versus stabilization of the naira, the reserves are dipping, and with the drop in oil prices, definitely we'll still have it dip further, because we don't have so much to save. Just looking at both, what do you have to say?
Yes, just before then, he mentioned the issue of unemployment. There's no doubt that unemployment rates today at 40%, that is both unemployment and underemployment, at 40% is quite high. That's even talking about the figure at third quarter of 2017. We still don't have any recent figure, because they say they don't have money to
bring out the data.
To bring out the figure. So it is quite high, and it's not about government. Government cannot do it all. Okay, the important thing is for us to create an enabling environment. To put infrastructure in place. Okay, if we have infrastructure, particularly power, okay, and then we'll develop skills.
He's already spoken about the need for infrastructure.
You can be very sure that this unemployment thing, will reduce. Talking about reserves, yes, reserves are under pressure with oil price coming down now. Except we ramp up output. Oil price is still above the budget reference price.
Yes.
But if you can ramp up oil output, the budget's 2018 budget had 2.3 million barrels per day, even though we've been nowhere around there. But if you can ramp up oil output, okay, then the effect may not be much, and then attract more of foreign investment. That shouldn't be a problem. But I don't see the reserves, plunging.
So much. October 14.
Mr. Ogbonna, let's have your final thoughts on the state of the Nigerian economy and how we can move forward.
Especially with the elections and people moving out of fiscal, facing